Welcome back to the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Pires coming to you from Baltimore. This is segment 2 with State Congressman Chris Lee. He represents the 51st District of Hawaii. He is currently the chair of the Committee on Energy and Environmental Protection. Also joining us is Mark Jacobson. He's professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Stanford University and the director of Stanford's Atmosphere Energy Program. Thank you both for joining us again.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So before we ended the last segment, Mark, we were speaking with you and we were talking about the plans you have derived to address switching from fossil fuels to renewable energy across the United States. Here, Hawaii is a case in point. They've actually passed an act, a bill in order to make sure that this takes place. And so let me go back to you, Mark. If you could outline, in the first segment you were talking about how we are going to make this transition possible. Tell us more.
Well, the idea is to transform the energy infrastructure of all states and eventually all countries. We're actually now working on plans for 139 countries of the world to entirely wind, water, and solar power for all purposes. That's electricity, transportation, heating, cooling, and industry. And not only would this transformation eliminate air pollution, which in the United States as a whole kills about 62,000 people prematurely each year, costing the United States about 3% of the GDP. In Hawaii, it's not quite so bad, but it's still about 200 premature mortalities each year in Hawaii. It also eliminate all global warming relevant emissions from all states in the U.S., which will cost in 2050 the world about $3.3 trillion. That's $1 trillion per year, just from U.S. emissions alone. We'd eliminate that. We'd create jobs. And this, in fact, across the United States, we found we'd create a net of about 2 million jobs more than we'd lose by doing such a transmission. There's construction jobs, and then there's permanent operation jobs, and we'd create a net over 40-year net creation of jobs. We'd stabilize energy prices because fossil fuels have high and rising fuel costs. I mean, in Hawaii, the electric power cost right now is, correct me if it's around 38 cents a kilowatt hour or so. And this would go down because significantly with a wind, water, solar system, we'd estimate in 2050 the cost of end-use electricity will be on the order of 11 to 13 cents per kilowatt hour because you have zero fuel cost. You stabilize energy prices, you have zero fuel cost, and whereas you have finite, you have to transport, in the case of Hawaii, you have to transport fuel across the ocean to get there for the most part. And you create energy stability. You don't have to rely on imports of energy from either foreign countries or, in the case of Hawaii, from the mainland. So there's all these benefits to a transition. And there's a lot of details I can go into, but I can hold off.
Congressman, let me let you get in on this. How is the business community responding to this act and the transition you're trying to make there?
You know, I think the business community in particular responded really positively. In fact, everybody did. We had almost no opposition to this effort. I think that's largely because we do pay higher prices than virtually anywhere else in the United States because we rely so exclusively on fossil fuels. And so getting off of that is something that can not only save money for everybody, but in particular, businesses who have a lot of energy consumption, whether it's electricity or fuels or anything else, they know this is the way to go. And I want to point out too, I mean, we're, I think collectively seeing really positive public response. I mean, Hawaii was the first place where we started measuring global atmospheric CO2, and now here we are, hopefully not just the first, but the first of many states and countries to take action because our very livelihoods and our future depends upon it. And here in the state, I'm really excited to see what Mark's been doing and others who've come in to say, look, there is a path forward. We can do this. Setting a goal which has penalties here if utilities don't meet these goals is important. And so we've got the geothermal, we've got wind and solar and everything else. But more than that, as Mark alluded to earlier, we have early plans right now that we're working on to move over our transportation sector and address that, because that's 2/3 of our energy usage here in the state. And so we're exploring projects with hydrogen fuel cells, which can produce power for vehicles off of solar and wind and off of energy that's not being used right now from large wind plants, which is just being curtailed and wasted. So there's a lot of opportunity, and we're really excited to get going.
Congressman, this is also a particular challenge for you. You have a number of islands you have to serve in terms of transporting energy. How are you going to tackle that?
Well, we have about 4 large island grids, and not all of them have the same resources. One island, the Big Island, for example, has a lot of geothermal. One island has a lot of wind, and we're going to have to figure out how in each place to take advantage of the resources that are there. Another option is potentially connecting the islands with an undersea cable so that you can use geothermal power from one island as base load for power on Oahu, for example, where you have most of the demand. But any way we go, there's, I think, really tremendous momentum, because driving this all is, number one, rising seas and climate change, which we have to face. Number two, making sure that we reduce our cost. And right now, installing renewable energy, whether it's wind, solar, or anything else, is beating the price of fossil fuels already. And so there's no reason why we should slow down, and every reason why we should continue to make these investments. And this bill really pushes the utilities and forces them to plan ahead and invest in those renewable resources rather than investing in more fossil fuels.
Mark, one of the other issues you're looking at is the number of jobs that this kind of a transition could create in the renewable energy sector. Give us a sense of what Hawaii might be tackling here in terms of new jobs.
Yeah, well, in the case of Hawaii, we'd have on the order of 10,000 or so construction plus operation jobs that would, we'd think, it's on the, 10 to 15,000 construction plus operation jobs that we think would be necessary. And, there would be job losses as well in the case of Hawaii. When we looked at the U.S. as a whole, there's a net of around 2 million jobs gained. In the case of Hawaii, it's closer to an equal wash, but it's, but there's still a slight net gain of jobs. When we're just looking at the energy in the electric power sector, but there's also, depending on whether Hawaii actually then takes up and starts manufacturing other components of this, like for example, could be jobs in storage devices or in electric cars. If there's more manufacturing or appliances, electric appliances, there could be more job creation. Really depends on what path they go in terms of either creating jobs themselves or either producing things themselves or just importing other things.
Now,
I'll add to that if I can, just to say that we've seen over the last 5 or 6 years tremendous job growth in, for example, our renewable energy, solar PV industry. Thousands of new jobs, and in fact, about a quarter of all building permits here in Oahu and Honolulu in recent years were for those sorts of installations. So there's tremendous growth, and I think a lot of people are looking forward to that. And even our legacy unions representing utility workers, they know that there's a change coming, and they're being very proactive, trying to retrain to adapt to installing new storage or doing whatever it is that's going to come next on the utility side. So I think we're ready to go, and that's another reason why the business community is so on board.
And Mark, last word to you. I'm very curious about the additional 2 million or so jobs you said net as a result of implementing such a plan, which will be very, I guess, important for people, say, in the mining sector or fossil fuel sector, who argues that there will be such tremendous job losses in places like Pennsylvania. I'm glad to hear what you're saying. But how would a mine worker, a mine family, entire town in a place like Pennsylvania expected to make this kind of transition?
Yeah, well, there would have to be job retraining, certainly. But there are skills, like there is a lot of these are construction jobs. I mean, for example, installing solar on rooftops, and so I don't think it's like that difficult of retraining for a lot of people who are used to, for example, in mining. To be retrained for installation, for example. But I'm not saying it's easy, and I don't have all the answers in terms of how that transition would work, and certainly effort would have to be put into place, but it's already occurring. I mean, there are already job growth already in the solar industry and the wind industry. I mean, wind has been growing dramatically in the Great Plains. There are installations going up all the time. So these people are being trained from somewhere. They're already being jobs are already being created. So there will be a transition, and I can't say it's going to be easy, but I think it will happen.
Professor Mark Jacobson, Congressman Chris Lee, thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.